Okay, so today we are talking about value propositions, how you create them, why they're valuable. I am really thrilled to be joined by Roger Cauvin, somebody I've known for a couple of years. I think one of the thought leaders in product management. You'll see in this presentation, I will provide a little of kind of the groundwork. Roger will talk about a lot of the work that he's done in this area, particularly in the consumer space. And I will then talk a little bit more about how this applies to complex solutions in the B2B space. You can ask questions right there in YouTube below the video. You should be able to add them. And we got a couple of questions through mail. So let's see how far we get with that. I will jump into my part of the presentation, and Roger will introduce himself in just a few minutes when I turn over to him. So, how do you create killer value propositions for your product? Critical question for product managers, and quite frankly, something that wasn't completely on my radar for a good part of my career. I knew this term. I knew that I had to deliver value, but really applying a kind of methodology to capturing value propositions, understanding where they fit in product development end to end is kind of, I think, a recent development for me last few years. So these are the questions we're going to try to answer today. What is a value proposition? How is it used? How can I create them? And is there a practice I can leverage to do it collaboratively? You will find that value propositions aren't something that you should just go off in a corner, craft, and then publish. It takes input from a lot of folks. So that is what we will look at. Quick introduction to me. I've spent my career in really big software shops. I am now a consultant and a trainer in the area of software product management. And I do this webcast series. So depends on what time of year, but let's say every month, sometimes every couple of weeks, I do webcasts. So look at my channel on YouTube and you can see recordings of previous webcasts. And there will be a recording of this webcast that you can refer back to later. So jumping right in, what exactly is a value proposition? Unfortunately, it isn't exactly anything. You will see that there are a lot of perceptions. There are a lot of even specific definitions that don't necessarily, they all seem to speak to the same thing, but certainly aren't identical. These are some that I found with just a very quick search. First one, it calls it an innovation, a service, or a feature. So a value proposition, they equate to some feature, I guess, of a product or a service. That just came as the default definition when you type it into Google. Another definition from Wikipedia characterizes it as a promise to deliver value, and it's a promise that's acknowledged by a customer or the market. So here it's a promise. We already have two definitions. One says it's a feature innovation. One says it's a promise. Another definition says it's a business or marketing statement. So now it's not just a promise, or it isn't a promise. It's a statement. A promise is a statement, but a statement isn't necessarily a promise. And here we have somebody saying it's the core of competitive advantage. So kind of teasing these things apart isn't particularly easy. As we prepared for this webcast, Roger and I saw that we have some different perceptions about value propositions, how they fit. 90%, I think, the same set of expectations, but there's some nuance, and you'll see that in the presentation today. That's something to keep in mind. I'll share what I think is a value proposition. Everybody else has come up with a definition. You should feel free to find the one that resonates with you, that creates value for you, and use it. Where did it come from? I looked this up. It's only been around since 1988. That's not that much time. And you can see the original definition. It's a simple statement of the benefits. That's pretty consistent with what we saw before. This definition also takes into account the price. So you can see that this concept has certainly evolved since the first time it was, broached in one of these papers. So if we're talking about value proposition, probably makes sense to define what value is here. I'm going to concentrate on customer value. Later, we'll talk about other stakeholders. And you just see, once again, these definitions: relative worth, difference between what a customer gets from a product and what they're willing to pay for it. And you see other definitions as well. So even the constituents of value proposition. I think proposition, fairly straightforward. A proposition is an idea. It can also be a promise. So the idea is that we really want to focus on value from the customer perspective. And as product people, we have a tendency to overlook that sometimes. We build something, we think it has inherent value, or we have perceptions about what the value is, and it's hard for us to relate completely to what customers find valuable. One of the reasons that defining a value proposition is so important. And when we think about value, we tend to think features and functions, but think about these things. The picture of your baby at the hospital, first picture of your baby ever taken. Maybe you play an instrument. I play guitar. This is my guitar. I love that thing. I get value from it way beyond what I paid for it. And we will find, as we talk about value propositions, this emotional component, especially in the consumer space, is really important. But value here isn't just economic value, the value of the materials and the work to put it together. It's richer than that. If you're lucky, your product creates emotional value as well. And just a quick note, to understand value, the value of a solution that you're creating, you really need to back up and understand the problem. We're not going to spend a lot of time in this webcast, just not enough time. Problem analysis could be a webcast of its own, and maybe it will be in the future. Suffice it for now to say that I always separate the problem domain from the solution space, or the problem space from the solution space. They're related, but they're different. Problems exist whether there's a solution to them or not. So it behooves you to go out, really figure out a market's problems, prospects' problems, people's problems, understand those deeply without too much regard to the solution, and then design a solution that solves those problems. We as people have a tendency to skip that step. It's very subtle. We see a problem and our brain already jumps to creating 1,000 solutions. I've worked with a lot of companies, and certainly what I've found is that they don't typically have a really solid handle on the problems they're solving. That's a great question to ask a product manager, especially one that seems to be very happy with himself or herself. What problems does your product solve? They will typically lock up, and it will take them a while to articulate that. So we're not going into it deeply today, but very much worth noting that to come up with the right value, you need to understand the problems deeply. So I look at a value proposition. I like this kind of promise definition, promise of value. So I am going to create value for you. I'm going to deliver it to you, and I want you to acknowledge it. I want you to acknowledge it by buying my product. That's the definition that resonates most with me. How can I capture a value proposition? What form does it take? There's a link at the bottom of the slide. I'll send the slides after the webcast, but there are a bunch of formats. You need to find one that works in your situation and use it. There's Jeffrey Moore's value positioning statement. We'll talk about positioning later, but that does do a fairly good job of capturing the value before I try to position it, usually relative to my competition. Roger, who will talk to us in just a moment, has created this competitive mindshare map, really cool tool. You should look into it, can be highly valuable. And then the folks that came up with the business model canvas now have the value proposition canvas. Really good book. I've used it with clients. I've used it in my training. I like it. I think there are other ways to capture them as well, but I think the exact format isn't critical. I think it's important. So find the one that works for you. And I will certainly show you at the end how I capture value propositions with my B2B clients. So the question comes up, for whom am I formulating the proposition? Well, we can say the customer, but we actually should also think about it a little more broadly. We should look at our customer stakeholders. I need to create value for most of them, if not all of them. And when I say customer in the B2B space, that's really almost a meaningless term. That sounds radical. So stick with me at the end. I'll show you what I mean. But in the B2B space, customer is really a compound entity. There are many people comprised by the customer, and I have to think about them, or it is worthwhile to think about them separately, because very often they may share kind of a general value proposition, but they certainly have their own value propositions as well. So who should create these things? We've talked about what they are. Very clear to me, if I'm thinking in a product development context, it's a product manager who should create the value propositions. Nobody should understand the intersection of kind of the what you're building and the why. Nobody should understand your stakeholders better than you do. So articulating this first statement of value is really up to you. That's the simple answer. It tends to be done collaboratively. Other people can help you, but I see this clearly as a core competency and accountability of product managers. So how do they get used? What do I do with a value proposition once I have it? This is one way to think about it. So first, I'm just going to articulate the value that I'm creating. And as I said, that can apply to a bunch of different stakeholders. Once I understand the value, typically I have to think about how I'm going to position that. And positioning is an exercise which creates kind of this relative position in people's heads. It's easiest to think of it from a competitive perspective. How do I want people to think about the value I'm creating relative to other people who create similar value? So a really simple example may be that I want people to perceive the value that I'm creating as something that's premium. I'm not out there competing with a bunch of other competitors on price. This is really something special. One example, I'll talk later about others. And once I understand the value I create and how I want to position it, where I want it to kind of sit in people's mental landscape, I can start doing messaging, or the organization can start doing messaging. And think of messaging as the verbatim text that goes into sales collateral that makes up an elevator pitch. So this is a nice progression. I identify the value that I plan to add. I figure out how I want to position that value relative to other things in people's heads. And then marketing typically can go off and actually create much better messaging than they could have if I, as this kind of hub of the development team, think through very specifically what value I'm going to create. So from my perspective, those are kinds of that's the basics of value propositions. I would like to hand over to Roger, and you'll see me back a little bit afterwards, and I will address value propositions in the B2B space.
Thank you, Greg. So I'd like to introduce myself first. I am a product manager in Austin, Texas, currently seeking an opportunity, actually. And my sort of specialty, my unique value proposition, is that I work by empowering teams through market information and strong understanding of marketing principles and positioning principles, like I'm going to talk about in a minute here. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of launch into what I'm going to talk about specifically, and that is walking through an actual sort of case study, as well as sort of some of the theory behind it as to how I, in the past, have worked with the product team to develop a unique value proposition using the competitive mindshare map tool that Greg mentioned earlier. So these two gentlemen are Al Reese and Jack Trout, and they wrote a book called Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind, and they sort of coined that term. Now, Greg mentioned earlier sort of a relationship between positioning and unique value propositions and messaging. Reese and Trout really treated the positioning side of things and the unique value proposition as the same, although they didn't use that term, unique value proposition. And so that's sort of my view. And as I walk through these succeeding slides here, I'm going to be treating positioning as roughly the same as unique value proposition. Greg will share later sort of how he does things a little bit differently. But these gentlemen wrote the book Positioning the Battle for Your Mind, as well as a few books after that have some really good instructive concepts to consider when you position. We're going to look at this. So the first key concept that's really important is that marketing takes place within the mind. There's a battle of perceptions going on. It's not about whether your product is better or different or provides value. In the end, it has to be perceived as doing so. Indeed, they say that, well, really the second key concept is that it's important to focus. So if it's a matter of perceptions, you've got to remember people aren't as familiar with your product as you are. So they're not going to store all this information in their brains, all this detailed information about your product. They can really only take the competitive landscape for the problems that they're trying to solve and store one key idea for each product in that landscape, including yours. So you have to figure out what that one word or benefit or theme is that you want to own in the mind of the customer. So that's what we're trying to do. When we do that, it becomes very effective for driving all of our marketing efforts and driving the development of the product itself, determining what we're going to put in the product that will help strengthen the value that we deliver as perceived in the mind of the prospect. So how do we do that? Well, so here's the competitive mindshare map. Competitive mindshare map treats the competitive landscape as the mind. So you can see in the center of the screen that you've got a brain, a mind, the mind of the prospect that has been divided into territories. Your product can't own the territories, cannot occupy all the territories in the mind. It has to cede territory to competitors. It's like a country within a continent or the world. A single country is generally not going to be able to occupy an entire continent. It has to acknowledge that it has limited scope and limited power. So our challenge is to find it states category names, but the themes or one word ownership of value that each of the competitors has, and then where you can fit within this competitive landscape of the mind and hold your own territory with your own singular value proposition. So as a case study, I was director of products at a company called Members Private Sale, and we sold online automobile marketplaces to credit unions so that the credit unions could offer their customers an online marketplace to buy and sell vehicles. In return, the credit unions were then able to have quick insight into transactions that were going to take place and be able to offer various services, including loans, which are a huge revenue driver for credit unions. So we went through and did a lot of customer interviews, a lot of interviews of prospective customers, users, people at credit unions, ordinary people who are credit union members, and we came up with this lean canvas that is a one-page depiction of our product strategy, of all the key components, including the problems solved, an overview of our solution, the ways we would know the key metrics that we would use for success, who our customer segments were, our unfair advantage, etc. But the challenge was, let's fill in this box that lies at the center of the product strategy And that's the unique value proposition. So how did we go about doing that using the competitive mindshare map? Well, we took each of the competitors, the key competitors and alternatives to our product, and we put their logos in the territories in the mind of the customer. So you can see we've got Craigslist, eBay, a company called Cuddle AutoSmart, and Auto Trader, as well as our own logo in there, Members Private Sale. Then we took all the research that we had done and assigned, based on the perceived strength of each of the competitors, a singular idea or theme that roughly represents the value proposition, the unique value proposition for each of those competitors. So Craigslist, for example, specializes in a general marketplace for local consumers. And so after we did that, then it says, okay, where can we fit into this picture? To fit into this picture, to work our way into the mind of the prospect, we have to either be able to take over existing territory that's occupied by other competitors, or we have to find territory that is empty, that is not currently occupied, or is just weakly defended. So what we did was looked at what are the unsolved problems. So this is a blow up of the problem box on our lean canvas, and we examined what the unsolved problems were that our product solved. Now it turns out the credit union products, the problems were very straightforward. And when we talk to folks at credit unions, when we talk to prospective buyers at credit unions, they were, it was very simple to describe the problem to them and for the problem to resonate with them. And what they wanted to know, though, is, okay, great. Now, when we take your supposed solution, will our members actually use it? What value do they get out of it that will cause them not to just go to Craigslist or some of these other competitors? So we really focused on the consumer problems to determine what our value proposition was going to be. And so if you look at these two problems, you see that it's about this cumbersome process of navigating the buying and selling of the vehicles, as well as some anxiety or fear. So when we looked at that, we came across, we tried to think of what is sort of an adjective that describes, that sort of represents an antidote to those pains. And the overarching theme that we came up with, that adjective, was personalized. So when a car buyer goes to a dealer for a car, they're usually not going to get a very good deal, and a lot of them know it, and they just suck it up, they just do it, because they know that the dealer is going to walk them through the entire process. And that eliminates some of the anxiety that they face. Now, they still have the anxiety that they're going to get a bad deal. So what our product did was to provide that experience, that personalized experience, but also help you get a great deal. And if you notice, that is some territory that we could uniquely occupy in the mind of the prospect. So then we said, okay, let's elaborate on this singular value proposition, on this singular theme that is the core of our unique value proposition. And we put it in this template. This is a great template. It's from a gentleman named Michael Skock. And it's loosely based on the template that Greg referred to earlier in Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. But it's a little bit modified by Michael Skock. So we took this, and if you look at the template, you see that it really tries to focus on, it really helps you ensure that you are solving a problem, if you look at that fourth line, and if you look at the last line, that it's unlike the alternatives. So it's essential that you are differentiating from the competition. So here's what we came up with. And so we took the personalized adjective, that one word that we own, that we were striving to own in the mind of the prospect. And our elaboration of it is directly below in the unique value proposition box on our lean canvas. And we have that blown up here. And so we used Michael Scott's template and were able to come up with this more verbose formulation of the value proposition, which you can think of as kind of an elevator speech or elevator pitch. And then there's this notion of a high-level concept that we also included, which is a shortened version that makes it easy for people to understand the what and the why, or at least imply the why in one brief statement. So then how do you know when you have a good unique value proposition? Well, besides having gone through the process of doing a competitive mindshare map and being able to visualize how your product is different, and having rooted the value proposition in a problem, in an unsolved problem that your product solves, there are ways that you can test that it actually resonates with the market. So here's what we did with Members Private Sale. We took a lot of our social media and other marketing channels and where we thought we could reach our target market. And we did what's called a channel test. So we took each of those channels and we posted a link to content as well as the call to action, but also our unique value proposition, or at least one aspect of our unique value proposition. So if you take if you express your unique value proposition in Twitter, Facebook, Google+, etc., all these different channels, and then you say, hey, if you want to get this value, visit this link. And so what we did is, without actually using our own product, third-party resources that helped a user fulfill the unique value proposition. So we posted our unique value proposition to these channels and said, hey, if you want instructions on how to solve this problem, or that will at least give you some guidance on how to solve this problem for yourself, go to this link. And then we, in advance of posting all of those things, we did predictions about what kind of traction we thought we would get, how many people would click those links. And then we tracked how many people did indeed click those links. And by doing that, we were able to test whether our assumptions about our value propositions, our possible value propositions, were sound or not. And so you can do this with some A/B testing and things like that in order to test various alternatives. So that is basically it. And you can contact me if you like on Twitter. You can connect with me on Twitter. You can find out more on my blog at blog.cauvin.org, and of course reach me by email. So thanks a lot. I will turn it back over to Greg.
All right. Thank you, Roger. Really good stuff. Now what I would like to do is talk a little bit about my experience doing value proposition work in the complex B2B space. And I hear a little static, Roger. I don't know if you have muted your microphone, but that might be a good thing. And I will pull my slides back up. So how do we think about value propositions in the B2B space? What I can tell you is historically, we haven't thought that much about them. This was something that sales did. This is something that marketing did. I knew, as I said before, that I was creating value, didn't really have a methodical way to capture and to think about it. What I learned is, particularly in this B2B space, value propositions are segment and even stakeholder specific. So it's complicated, and I'll take you through some slides describing what I mean. If we talk about market segments, we first have to understand markets. And this is a word that gets thrown around all the time. I don't think most people have a common definition. This is my definition. The market is all the people who have the means and interest to buy your product. So for whatever reason, they would be interested in it, and they would actually have probably the money to buy it everywhere in the world. And they're in marketing theory, all kinds of ways to pare that down, but that's what a market is. And by the way, markets are not equal to customers. Customers are the part of the market that has already bought our solution. So they tend to be a subset. How small of a subset depends on our market share, but you shouldn't confuse these. And in the enterprise space, I've worked at some really big companies. Believe it or not, people start getting confused. They have so many customers, such big brand name customers, that they forget that there are still people who haven't bought their product. So it's not enough just to understand your customers. That's important. You need to understand the markets. So what is a market segment? A market segment are groups of people within the market who have similar requirements, needs, interests, those kinds of things. So it's not like just your market is homogenous, that everybody has the same desires, the same preferences. It's not that at all. Typically there are groups of folks that, because of common characteristics, will have a different perception of value of your product, will have a different set of requirements. Here's a super simple example. If we think of Microsoft Word, it serves several segments. One of those are just casual private users like my mom. She types recipes in Microsoft Word every once in a while, and that's already kind of taxing to her. We have novice business users who do kind of simple things. They need like a really simple formula language in Excel, or like in a table. They need text styles. They may use a table of contents. We have advanced business users. All these people are using Word, but with different emphasis, with different needs. They need things like mail merge. They need to be able to import and export from other formats. And then you have some people who are working with really huge documents, and they have a set of needs. So they're all using Word. The way they perceive the value in Word is different, and maybe you can get to them with a single message. Word is the word processor for all your needs, or something like that. But if you think back to my slide where I said we're trying to get to the point that we can create effective messaging, I might very well create different messages for each one of these segments. How do I segment? It depends. It's different in the B2C space than it is in business to business. In business to business, there's this term called firmographics. I want to know where they're located, what their income is, what their industry is. Something that I don't necessarily see so much in the consumer space, although it's certainly relevant, is the level of commitment they already have to me. Is this a longtime customer? Have they made a big investment in previous solutions or previous versions? And then what is their commitment to the category at all? So you hear in the B2B space people talking about Greenfield Opportunities, meaning I'm going to go sell my solution to a company that doesn't have anything like it today, brand new. And that's a different process in practice than replacing something that they already have. So here's an example of a segment in the B2B space. I might be doing surveillance solutions, and I'll show you a architecture in a moment. But I might be tailoring that to traffic authorities, people responsible for like highway traffic in medium-sized city in Europe that have complex installations. They already have more than 200 cameras. That's one segment. They have certain needs that may be completely different than small traffic authorities in East Asia that have a few cameras. Very likely that I'm going to speak to them in different ways. Some of the messages will be the same. But when I get to really specific messaging, which is a good idea, I will speak to these folks differently. I will bring up, different features, and I will position them differently. So in the B2B space, this isn't intuitive to everybody, but the word customer is just a conversational convenience. Customer this, customer that. The truth is that term encompasses a lot of stakeholders. The people who buy the solution, the people who use the solution, the people managing the people who use the solution. You may have a purchasing department that isn't going to use it, but they're responsible for following a process that makes sure that due diligence is done in terms of purchase. And guess what? These folks have different requirements, different perceptions of your product. They receive value differently. And I'll show you how that works in a moment. Here's a typical complex solution. It's not just software, it's also hardware. This comes from a company I worked for several years ago. Their core competency was putting cameras all over the place. These cameras had software running on them that could detect when things happened, and they would send an event to a control center. Somebody sitting in front of a computer would get an event, and they would say something like, there's a traffic jam, or there is a crowd forming, or there is a trash can fire, or whatever it is. So selling this solution was fairly complicated. Sometimes we sold it to a city. And if you think about what I said, there's the mayor of the city. He has to get something out of it. There may be the head of police. There are the people who install it. There are the operators who are going to be sitting behind the screens. And they each recognize or realize value differently. So in these situations, when we wanted to come up with marketing messages, we had to think about them differently. A tool that I've used to do that is a spreadsheet. I think all really important information is in a spreadsheet. And I call them value statements. I try to capture them in a way that they could be converted very easily into a promise of value. But I see this as the first step, just understanding the value that you provide to these different stakeholders. So I'm going to switch over to the actual tool. You can see that here I've got a list of the stakeholders. For this solution, there's an operator, the person who sits behind the, sits in front of the screen. There is the CEO or the mayor, basically the executive leader of the organization. There's a CTO who typically is responsible for the budget. Oh, we've got procurement in there. Procurement doesn't care if it's got a pretty UI, if it's scalable. They want to know that there's a licensing model that they can effectively balance capital expenditures with operating expenses. So very different people. We found it really important to go through for each of them and understand what value we plan to deliver to them. Once we understand that value, we can begin to position it. We can begin to help shape how people consider it relative to alternatives. And once we've done that, marketing really has some great input to create great messaging. And I'm still playing around with the format. It's not necessarily an intuitive. You have to look at this kind of calculated statement, but I capture the stakeholder here. There is an expression of value. There is a feature, a characteristic, an attribute of the solution. These aren't always like functional things like a blue button or something like that. Sometimes it's, something like our experience, our brand equity, that kind of thing. And then I express the benefit. So you can see for a surveillance operator, these things come together in a statement that talks about who is receiving the value, what the value is, specifically how I deliver it. So as a surveillance operator, I value the peace of mind I get from documented procedures because clear guidance is critical for avoiding inefficiency and errors while handling events. It's a lot there, but the idea is there are these events that come in, like something's on fire. The operator wants something that steps him through what he needs to do. This application had these things called procedures that said, do this, call the police, call the fire department, do this, 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 and this. What was the value they realized from that? It was peace of mind. And if I look at the CEO level, there's also probably a peace of mind value proposition, more about our experience implementing these kinds of solutions, our financial robustness, so they know once they invest in us, We won't go belly up and waste their investment, that kind of thing. So this is a tool to start capturing the value, sets up marketing to help me position it and create really good messaging. And for example, these statements or statements like these will go into different pieces of collateral. There will be something on the website for CEOs. There will be a brochure for the technicians. There will be messages if we're addressing maybe operators at a conference or something. So different requirements, different problems, different aspects of the solution, and different value. So how do I do this collaboratively? Well, the first point is you should do it collaboratively. This isn't something you do by yourself. To do proper value propositions, you're going to need to understand the segments. You're going to need to understand these stakeholders, define them, agree upon them. You need to understand your offering end to end. Sometimes it's not just software or hardware. It's a bunch of things together. And then you need some tool for capturing these things. You can use the tool that Roger showed us. You can use a spreadsheet like I did. And you get the right people at the table. That's usually product management. I would try to have somebody from sales there, somebody from marketing. That's kind of critical mass. Maybe somebody from leadership in the organization. They often have perspective that others don't. Schedule a meeting, tell them what you're trying to achieve. We want to identify just the value and document that. I always do it. We start with brainstorming, just bringing all kinds of stuff up, capturing it. We then prioritize it. We throw out things that don't make sense. Sometimes things we think are valuable, it turns out aren't really valuable to our customers. Sounds nuts. I've seen it happen all the time. In our little product lab, we think, wow, they're going to love this. And it turns out to be negative value, something they don't want. You can then validate these things. Roger talked a little bit about that. I'll give you some insight how that's done in B2B. And then you need to define what is going to happen with this stuff. And typically what happens is you use it to create battle cards, like competitive battle cards that help salespeople sell things, elevator pitches, pitch decks. Marketing gets involved and creates brochures, updates the website. So once again, we're trying to understand value, how to position it so that we can message it effectively to the market. Validating in B2B is a little bit tricky. You can do some of this A/B stuff, but quite frankly, these relationships are built on trust. They're very valuable. Very often, customers are investing millions of dollars in our solution. And yeah, the best luck I've had is based on good personal relationships to talk to them. Pardon me. Just talk to my customers. Find a couple of them and say, hey, look, this is what I think people are going to value. You can also do surveys, but the best luck I've had is one-on-one people I trust that are in my target market who can help me validate that, yeah, you understand it. You understand the value and that sounds good and you're trying to be a premium brand. I can see you in that space, that kind of thing. The ultimate validation, of course, is success. The ability to put this thing on the market, communicate its value to customers and have them respond and buy it. So that's the end of the content about value propositions. I hope that was helpful. As you see, I have a software product management course. I give them live. I also have an online version. It's basically over 8 hours of lectures, exercises, all kinds of things that teach you the basics of product management end to end, including value propositions, the stuff about stakeholders. You can take it at your own pace, and then you can get internationally certified, very likely in thousands of testing centers around the world, probably very close to where you live. And for taking your time today with us, I would like to make an offer. I will give anybody who enrolls by the end of the month a 20% discount. Send me an email and I will send you a coupon. This is the Halloween special. Very American thing. May not mean that much to my European friends. But just hit me up on email or through my site, prickril.com, and would be happy to get you a 20% off coupon. So I'm going to stop sharing. I am going to try to go to YouTube and look at the comments. Feel free to ask questions there. Let's see if I can do this. Let me kill the camera for just a second so you don't get a bunch of screen noise. And I am looking for questions. All right, I don't see any yet.
I've got a question for you, Greg.
Yes.
So in that collaborative, in those collaborative sessions with the B2B stakeholders, or with the with your own, with the B2B stakeholders, are you what kind of challenges did you face in those sessions? Did you find that having sales and some of the other folks in there, did you get a good diversity of perspectives when you were doing the positioning or the determining the unique value propositions, or did you have sort of personalities get in the way or anything like that?
So far, not much trouble with that. Sometimes you have people with kind of really bad attitudes, and you find that everything you bring up, they say that's not unique, that's not special. And you ask them, well, what is special about? I mean, we're obviously selling this product, so why are we able to sell it? But for the most part, I think if you get the right number, right people set the right expectations. Sometimes I start that process by doing a SWOT of the offering itself. That makes us think where it's strong, where it's weak. And from that, you start deriving the value. But I'm with a client now. We're preparing for a big presentation to the board, and we're going through. I actually kind of sanitized the screenshot that you saw, and it's going really well. At this company, people really appreciate it. So sales is tired of getting these blah, blah, blah kind of brochures and pitches from marketing that, you know, don't make sense to the customer, don't promise anything unique. Sometimes the information, we just had an incident where some information was presented that was clearly wrong. So sales likes it. Marketing loves the idea of having the value proposition very clearly articulated before they're asked to do anything. Normally they have to go into product management and mine this stuff a little bit, have meetings and figure it out, kind of tease it out of the product manager's head. So far things have gone well. I think it's a matter of, picking people carefully. And if you know that there are people who are just like super negative, usually a lot of times those people are in sales, they have a tough life. The kind of person who's just going to shoot everything down and complain, maybe they're not the first person you invite to the meeting.
Yeah, I hear you. That's one of the things that I found in the sessions that I've conducted was that it's very disarming if you make sure that you get down all of the thoughts of the different folks in the room so that they feel like they're being heard, and it helps disarm that sort of negative attitude sometimes, just to make sure that as you're going through the process, it's not you doing all the talking, it's you getting all of the ideas from all of the people. So I found that was very effective in the cases that where I've conducted these sessions. But one of the challenges that I did face, or that our teams have faced, is the specific wording. So we could sort of gravitate towards a singular idea to express the value proposition and turn it into a statement. then you'd get all sorts of objections to minor words and should we insert this, should we insert that? And we'd end up, we'd be in these sessions and we'd have, 3-paragraph value proposition, which obviously is too long. To constantly be very disciplined and try to trim it down and keep it short. Have you faced that as well?
Kind of. And what I do is I always show that slide that shows we want to capture the value. Later, we'll think about positioning and messaging. So I tell them, guys, this isn't verbatim what is going to go into a brochure or on the website. Let's capture the key idea and make sure that it basically makes sense. It's marketing's job to turn that into something that's really concise and flows and all that stuff. And I think that helps to lower the bar. To say, guys, let's just capture it, let's prioritize it, and then figure out what we do with it to keep from getting hung up on those things. So I think it is difficult to go in one fell swoop from capturing what the value is to exactly understanding how you're going to position and message that. So that might be a technique to say, hey, guys, we're just trying to come up with an expression of the value. All the nice wording and the semicolons and quotes and all that stuff will happen when we do the messaging. And maybe, I think that helps people stay focused.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And with some of these companies, what I found is that when the value proposition, when that concept and not necessarily all the specific words are very clearly understood by all the internal stakeholders, that it ends up being very empowering. And I see the marketing messages coming out from marketing, and I'm like, wow, that is a great expression of one or more aspects of the value proposition. And so it really can help the organization run much more efficiently when everybody has that mutual understanding of what the value propositions are and can then articulate them in a customized fashion in the manner that makes the most sense for any particular context.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, if you read your brochures, if you look at messaging, the stuff on your site, and it just, kind of puts you to sleep, I would say 90% of the time, that's because the value proposition wasn't nailed in the first place. It's not because marketing didn't know how to write or that they're not creative or they didn't get, that can happen too. Especially in multilingual environments, I see a lot of collateral that isn't written by native speakers, which is very kind of tricky endeavor. But if you look at the stuff on your site, and even as a product manager, marketing gets blamed a lot. Man, they just don't know how to write good stuff. Actually, when I peel the onion a little bit, what I see is that the product manager didn't really nail the value proposition, didn't feed marketing with what they needed to write great stuff. And the truth is, nobody likes to talk about this, but the truth is, in a mature market, when you look at your offering, you're not going to find much obvious stuff that's unique. By definition, in a mature market, it's been there a while. I can tell you in my personal experience as a product manager working with customers, it can be very kind of disheartening to go through this exercise and say, God, we don't have really anything that our competitors don't have. But there you have to be creative and probably think non-functionally. Don't think about the features, the big red button, the scalability, the interoperability, and think about, do customers trust us? Do we have partnerships that make us look better? And over time, you can carve out your little space. You can take that value, maybe almost the same value that other people are delivering it, and position it in a way that resonates with the market. So it's not just an apples to apples comparison. You're positioning in a way that makes people think about your offering a little bit differently. And that can make all the difference. So,
and it ties back to, Greg, it ties back to what you said earlier about the importance of relationships in the B2B space. And so some of those some of those formulations of the value proposition that you mentioned there that might not be based on feature and function are based on that relationship, the trust, and other sorts of aspects of the relationship that customers would have with the company.
Yeah, that may not be obvious to them. So this whole positioning thing is very important. And positioning can be used against you. Your positioning can be repositioned. So you say we're the established market leaders. Your competitors are saying, man, they're old. They don't know how things work today. They're not using new technology. So you have to remind them and educating. Sometimes this value proposition exists. It's not obvious to your customers, and that's where this positioning and messaging comes in. So Roger, I want to thank you so much for participating. I think this was a great discussion. I think there's a lot more to talk about, whether it's about the problem analysis that precedes a lot of the value proposition, going more into these tools, how they're used, how they can be tested. But I hope this whets people's appetite to explore this topic a little bit more. You can reach me at greg@prickril.com. Go to my site. Same thing with Roger. So I wish everybody an amazing weekend. And look in the next couple of weeks, next few weeks, for another announcement on the next installment in the series. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for all the listeners.
Bye, everyone.